Hey guys, it's Kevin again, and if you guys remember, back in, I would say, the beginning of April, there was a little show that came out called Fosse, Verdon. I reviewed the first episode of it, and then I just kind of fell behind, whether it was because, of me not having the inability to review the show because of, not having a laptop and things like that, or having to review other stuff, and I just kind of fell behind. For whatever reason, I just was not able to catch up on this show. And I do very much apologize for that. I don't want you guys to think, oh, I stopped watching the show because it was bad. No, of course I didn't want to. The whole point of me, I'm a musical fan. You guys know this is like my bread and butter. Like, this was a show I was so hyped for. And, if I could have, I would have tried, really wanted to review every single episode for you guys, but unfortunately, I just fell behind and I was unable to. So what I decided to do is, there has been 7 episodes since that last one I talked about. 6 episodes since, actually, since the last one I talked about. So the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to talk about 4 of them in this video, and then I will review the other 2 episodes individually, and then, of course, the finale I will talk about individually. But with that out of the way, just wanting to right now, I will say right off the bat that I am still absolutely loving the show. Pretty much every single episode I'm going to discuss in this review is better than the last, and I really do love that for sure. But we're just going to get into it right now. So the first episode I'm going to be talking about, of course, is episode 2, Who's Got the Pain, and this episode was probably what a lot of people expect the first episode to be, because, the first episode was basically in the middle of their relationship, after Bob had completed Sweet Charity and was making Cabaret, and a lot of people probably expected that, the first episode would be how they met. This is much closer to what you probably expect it to be, and I really did love this episode. However, out of the 4, it is, I think, the weakest of the 4 episodes for sure. And that's mainly due to something I'll talk about in a little bit, but I'll talk about the things I liked. One of the things I really loved about this episode, that focuses a lot more on Gwen and who she was throughout all this. Gwen was someone who, she had won a Tony and things like that, and she was very she was looking for work, and, she came across Bob, but at the time, Bob had only choreographed 1 show. He hadn't really made a name for himself yet, and I really love getting to see these 2 working together. You understand the type of relationship that they had, and right from the beginning, yeah, what Bob is doing, yes, it is very sleazy. Yes, it is very, inappropriate, the type of relationship he has with Gwen, obviously because he is married, but you see that trust they have in each other. You see that dedication they have in each other, and that's something I think they set up very well here, just through that one scene they have where, he tells her to come, he asks her to stay after hours, after rehearsal, and, he's working on something with her. I thought was a really great scene. I really liked what they ended up doing there, and then who Bob was at the time as well, with his wife, who, of course, was dying and things like that. I thought they did a really good job with setting all of that stuff up, and that's something that I did enjoy for sure. But contrast that, of course, with, Gwen and Bob in the present, which I thought was extremely effective. At this point, Gwen, she's realizing that Bob has feelings for, this random translator from Cabaret who we saw in the first episode. He is genuinely starting to get feelings for her, and Gwen is very hurt by this. She feels like, this is, he asked her to, remember, when he asked her to come to the show, come help him out with the movie, the first thing she said to him is like, am I going to enjoy it? She knew something like this was going to happen, and she's very upset that it did, and she was really hoping that this trip that they were taking could maybe reaffirm their relationship, but instead it seems to be just the opposite, and I thought that was very effective, especially the conversation that she has with Joni McCracken when she's talking to her about how she always knew that Bob didn't really love just her. He didn't want to be with just her. There were always girls on the side, and, she basically tells Gwen, you're not special. There's nothing different about your relationship. While he does seem to care about you, there is nothing different than, what he and I have. And I thought that was a very effective scene, because you see that this is not Joni. At the time, Gwen doesn't really feel this way at all. She kind of takes some offense to this, but in the present day, when, Bob is now expressing his, his feelings for this translator, you have that moment where Gwen, she's like looking at the sunset, and Michelle Williams, I mean, that's just the definition of just perfect acting right there. I mean, just the way she's able to convey just the despair, but also her finally realizing that, holy shit, Joni had a point. I am exactly like Joni is right now. Yes, I am married to Bob and things are working out, but in reality, Bob is she's not the only girl that Bob is with right now. Bob clearly is not looking for that sort of, any sort of monogamous relationship. That's not something he really does believe in. And I thought that was a very effective scene for sure. And I really like the way that was contrasted with the stuff we get with Bob and Gwen and the starting of their relationship, and then again seeing Gwen in the present day and her starting to realize that, Joni was actually right. I thought that stuff was very effective. What didn't work about this episode for me is I felt it was quite rushed. I felt there were a lot of things that we could have dived into more. Specifically, Joni McCracken, she didn't really feel like a character in this episode. She felt much more like a plot device. Like, we know that she's going to die very soon. We know that Bob is going to end up with Gwen because of it, and we know that Joni's going to have this conversation with Gwen, but I don't think they dived enough into who Joni McCracken really was. She actually was similar to Gwen in the sense that she was an actress and she had a career, and I think they could have, I would have wanted a couple more scenes between her and Gwen because I thought that stuff was so well done. And also, as much as I did like the interactions between Gwen and Bob, I needed a little bit more there. I thought it was a little bit rushed overall, and I do think this is one of those episodes that would have worked if it was 2 episodes. I think if they had 9 episodes, then this could have been a little bit more effective. Also, the choice to do Heart at the end of the episode, similar to what they did with Cabaret in the first episode, it didn't really work here. It really didn't. The first one, it worked extremely well. Perfectly conveyed how they were feeling in that given moment. Here, on the other hand, I don't really know what they were trying to convey. I don't know why they chose to do this. I mean, there's so many songs you could have done from Damn Yankees, and they chose to do this one. I love the Who's Got the Pain stuff, though. That moment was great, especially the moment where, Bob is being told that this number isn't working the way it is, and that, this was before Bob was a director. At this point, he was just a choreographer. He was, you can already see why Bob wants to direct, because he doesn't want to be told what to do. He doesn't want to change things. He wants to do what he feels is right for the piece, and you see the beginnings of that here, too, and I thought that conversation was very well done. Seeing Bob getting reprimanded, and I just really did like seeing that, and then you see that Gwen right in that moment, they realize that trust they have for each other. Gwen feels the same way about this number, and that's what turned Who's Got the Pain into the iconic number it is today between Gwen Verdon and Bob Fosse, and I thought that scene was very effective overall. So like I said, there is definitely a lot of stuff to like about this episode. I just felt as a whole, it did feel a little bit rushed to me. I feel like they definitely could have added a little bit more, or like I said, carried into another episode, and I think it would have been something truly great. It still is a great episode, just not as great as it could have been. So I am going to give this episode overall a B+. So the next episode, of course, I'm going to be talking about is episode 3, Me and My Baby, and holy shit, this one was pretty hard to watch. I mean, there was a lot of stuff here that it gets really heavy because we really do dive deeper into Gwen's backstory, who Gwen was before she met Bob, and it's devastating to hear. I mean, essentially, Gwen, she wanted to be a star. That was the main thing that she really wanted, and she came across this guy. It seemed like he was going to help her out, but in reality, he really just wanted sexual favors from her. He ended up raping her, and they had this child together, and her family was completely, they were completely against it. They basically blamed her for it. She was forced to marry the man. It's just, it's devastating to hear, and seeing where Gwen basically having to do all of this on her own, have this child that she didn't want, have to do all of this, married to this man that she really doesn't like either, and having to just get all this work on her own, was very sad to see, and I like the way that's contrasted to the present day, of course, or at least, of course, then it was the present day, when it cuts to seeing Gwen and, Bob and the way that their relationship is, because again, that professional relationship, that's what keeps them together. That's what keeps their whole sort of relationship afloat. But we really do see here the cracks in the foundation. I mean, the way that Bob acts towards Gwen, it's very patronizing, especially when he's talking to her about this play that she's doing. Because while Bob is editing Cabaret, Gwen is trying to look for other work. She's trying to stay relevant. She doesn't just want her only work to be Sweet Charity. She wants to do something else. And you see that desperation in her, and I thought they portrayed that very well. She goes to do this other play, and when she does it, basically she's told that she doesn't have very good chemistry and things like that with this little girl that she's supposed to be like the mother of, with this little boy that she's supposed to be the mother of. And Bob literally tells her, like, no, they should replace it with a little girl because you don't have any experience with raising a son, and you don't understand how that is. And that alone, I mean, it just shows, like, this was not a healthy relationship. Like, he talked down to her quite a lot, and you really do see that here. But even at all that, she still wishes that he was the director. She still wishes that he was the one directing her because he was the only one that understood it. He was the only one that understood things creatively, and you can really understand that, and I thought they did a very good job with that. But also delving into, their family and things like that, especially when it comes to Nicole. I mean, Nicole, they show her a lot in these last few episodes. I have to say, Blake Baumgartner, I think that's how you pronounce her name, she is fantastic. Such a great child actress. She perfectly portrays the neglect, the sort of just odd sort of relationship that Nicole really did have, how desperate she was to connect with her father, but also how alone she felt a lot of the time, and especially here when Gwen is doing the play and she leaves Bob to watch Nicole, but Bob, because he is so preoccupied with other things, he doesn't, watch Nicole. He actually makes Patty watch Nicole, and Gwen is obviously furious. She doesn't care that this was a friend of Bob's. To her, this is just a random guy. This is a random guy that he left Nicole with, and the fact that he cannot look after his own daughter, she has a right to be angry, and I really loved that scene between them when she goes off on him, because again, it shows that, Gwen always feels this way. Gwen always has this, utter hate towards Bob, but she rarely shows it because, again, it's going to damage their creative relationship, and she doesn't want to. So it's very complicated in that way, and I thought that scene in particular really did show just how tough things were for Gwen in this given moment, and I thought that was definitely interesting. I thought they definitely did an interesting job with that. But Bob also, of course, he's offered this other role. He's going to possibly direct Pippin, which we know he does end up doing Pippin, and he wants Gwen to possibly play the mother, and she straight up tells him that she could never do that, and we understand why, obviously, because of those flashbacks. It's too hard for her. It brings back painful memories, and she just doesn't think that she would be able to do that she'd be able to portray someone like that, and, that's really the role that has defined her entire life. It shaped her into the person that she is today, and again, it's too painful for her, and I thought that was something that they handled very well, and I really did love that. But what I also liked is that this episode wasn't just about Gwen or about Bob. It was really about both of them. We see things through Bob's perspective, like that scene where things are going great for him. He's surrounded by all these girls. In his mind, he's like on top of the world. He's like Fred Astaire or something. I thought they handled that very well. But then with Gwen, whose life is, not nearly as positive, they portray it very well there, too. So overall, I thought there was a lot of great stuff to like about this episode. I did like that we got to see a little bit more of Liza Minnelli. I thought maybe they'd show her more. Maybe it's just because of how much I loved, what was her name? Kelly Barrett's portrayal. I thought she was just so phenomenal in the role, and I love what she did. But, for what they did, I thought they did a good job with that. I also did like seeing Gwen start to move on from Bob, realizing that he's not going to give her that affection. She's going to get it from other men. If Bob can do it, so can she. And I like that moment where he goes in and he's angry at her. And it makes you realize how hypocritical Bob was. Like, he was doing the exact same thing to her, but yet he was angry about it. She repressed a lot of it. It was really that moment. There are moments, obviously, where she unleashes her anger, but she repressed a lot of it, and it really just shows how horrible of a guy Bob really is. And that's the thing I think they've done very well with this series. They get you to understand Bob's pain, but they're not at all justifying the type of man that he is, and that's something I think, especially in this episode, they do a very good job with. So overall, there was a lot I really did love about this episode, and I'm definitely going to give this one overall an A-. So the next episode we're talking about is episode 4, Glory, and holy shit, I fucking loved this episode. And look, a lot of that comes from my love for All That Jazz. You guys know, for me at least, I've talked to a lot of people about this, but if I had to pick like a favorite film, All That Jazz might honestly be it. I think it is such an intimate look at, an artist and how dedicated they are to their art, to the point where that takes precedent over everything else. And that's kind of what we got here. We really got to look at how Bob Fosse was feeling in this given moment, because, in this episode, he's getting everything. Pippin is working out really well. He's getting all these awards for it. He should be in really good spirits, but he's not. He doesn't feel like he deserves the work that he's getting. He doesn't feel like he can make something as good as it again. And again, this is a very good episode where they do a good job of examining who Bob Fosse was, but not trying to romanticize the type of person he was ever, because they make it very clear that, like, this is not a good person. He's very dismissive, and we even see in this episode, especially when it comes to Joan Simon, who is dying in this episode, which was very sad to see. I loved Aya Cash in the show, and this being her last episode, they definitely ended it on the right spot, because Gwen, on the other hand, her and Nicole, they're going to see her, things are going great, and she requests that Bob sees Joan, but Bob isn't doing that. He's too focused on rehearsing. He's too focused on Anne Ranking at the moment, who he's clearly growing interest in. And you can see that this is really starting to annoy Gwen. Gwen, on the other hand, her career is not working out so well. The play that she thought was going to turn out well, of course, it doesn't end up going well at all. It basically closes before it opens, which is very sad to see for sure. But again, it's a very good reason why Gwen has never gotten that recognition that Bob Fosse has, and it's sad, but this is a very good reason why. And that's a big point that this show has been trying to make, is that she should have gotten the recognition. In an ideal world, she would have gotten it. I mean, we saw it in the last episode especially how hard she had to work, and it's not that Bob hasn't had to work. He has, for sure, but things are going so well from here. He's winning Tony after Tony. He seems to be just handling things very well. And things, for some reason, though, it's not enough for him. And this especially showed in the scene where he's talking about how he does not want Pippin to end the way that it does end. He doesn't want Pippin to end with him getting the girl. He wants Pippin to just light himself on fire, because it's easier to do that. And that's something that we see for Bob. It's hard for him to maintain a relationship because he knows he's going to fuck it up. He knows that it's not going to turn out very well, and he just doesn't think it's very realistic, and he thinks he should just go out in a blaze of glory, essentially. But of course, he can't do that. He has to maintain his relationships, and I thought them presenting almost the entire episode in the style of Pippin, in the style of a musical, viewing the way that Fosse does, again, it is startlingly similar to that of All That Jazz. I've heard many people say All That Jazz is like sort of an autobiography, and obviously Fosse didn't know that he was going to die and things like that, but the way that Joe looks at life in that movie is similar to how Fosse views life in this episode. A lot of things are like this extravagant musical to him, and I thought they did a really great job with that. And like I said, Joan's final scene as well, it's just heartbreaking. When Gwen is with her and she's telling Gwen to look after Nicole, that's the last thing that she tells her. It's sad because this was someone that I think genuinely did care about Gwen. It's one of the only people that she genuinely could rely on, someone that she could have a conversation with. She's made so many warnings about Bob, and I don't think Gwen even needed them. I think Gwen knew that what Joan's saying was true, but it was just easier for her to stay in this relationship because, again, she didn't want to ruin that creative relationship that Bob kind of doesn't need. He needs someone like Gwen in his life to kind of push him and things like that, and, we definitely do see that here. And, again, Aya Cash, just fantastic in the show. Sad to see her go, but they definitely ended things quite well. I have to say, though, the best thing about this entire episode, without any question, is the final, 5 to 6 minutes, which I thought were just extraordinary. And no pun intended, obviously, because of the song. But I love the way this was done, because Bob, at this point, he's at the end of his life. He's won all these awards, and he feels like he should just end it all right now. And we see this sort of fantasy sequence where literally every single person in his life, you got, it ranges from Patty and Gwen to even smaller players in Pippin, these girls that he's possibly had sexual advances with, them telling him to just end it all, them telling him that, oh, your life isn't important, you're gonna think about how you're gonna be remembered for this and things like that. And it's something that you could genuinely see Bob doing, because again, how much that pressure is him. But who is the person to talk him out of it? Not Gwen, it's Nicole. And considering a conversation that they have in the next episode, which I'll get into, I think there's a very good reason why. But this entire sequence, I mean, if I had to pick like the best sequence of the year in TV right now, this would be a very easy contender. You'd be very hard pressed to not find that there, because this is just everything I could have ever wanted out of this show. I love just how elaborate it was. I thought everyone sang the hell out of this entire performance, and I adore every single second of it. It perfectly captures the overwhelming sort of sense of fear that Bob has, but also how he doesn't feel satisfied. No matter what he does, he just doesn't feel like it's enough. He feels like he needs to keep going. He views every project as something that is life or death to him, as something that is a life sentence in that way. And you definitely do see that, and how that has gotten in the way of many of his key relationships, and how he's not very focused and things like that. And especially using Ben Viren, I mean, I don't think that's any coincidence whatsoever. I think they very well were trying to emulate that the final scene and all that jazz, and it very much seemed that way. And I love the way that all of that was done there. I thought they did such a great job with that set piece. And again, it's all because of how well built up it is in the episode. Patty talking to him and telling him that these awards mean absolutely nothing and that he could just keep winning them. It's supposed to be a sign of encouragement, saying that, like, your talent does not reflect the amount of awards that you're getting, that even though you're getting these awards, you're above them in that way. Like, it doesn't really mean much of anything. And you see how that starts to have an impact on him. Or him talking to, like I said, him talking about Pippin and realizing that, hey, Pippin can go out in a blaze of glory, maybe I can as well. And that's kind of like the way they built everything up, and I thought that alone made this sequence that much stronger. And of course, the episode does end with Bob finally deciding to help himself out. Maybe he's finally going to turn his life around. Maybe he's finally going to get back into the good spirits and things like that. Finally put these demons aside of him. But of course, we'll get into that with the next episode. But either way, there was just so much to love here. I love the way this episode was filmed. I loved how much we got into Bob's head. I thought that stuff was great. Joan Simon's farewell was just kind of tear-jerking, honestly. Michelle Williams, I mean, I can't praise her enough here, but she just did such an excellent job. But particularly Sam Rockwell, I thought really stood out in this episode. I mean, his Fosse is just so great. You understand the kind of person that Bob Fosse is, and I think Rockwell is just doing a tremendous job. And this episode is a very big reason why. I just really adored a lot of stuff about this one, and I'm definitely going to give this episode overall an A. But now we're going to be talking about the final episode, at least that we're going to be talking about in this video, and that is episode 5, Where Am I Going? Where to begin with this episode? Holy shit, there's so much I loved here, and I know I keep harping on it, but there's just so much I love about the show, but particularly this episode. What I loved about it is the approach they took. This could have easily been, like in a lesser show, this episode would have been like one conversation. It would have been one conversation and that would be it. But this show, it's not trying to rush things. It's really trying to get into the story as much as possible. And I like that this episode was more of a episode centered on all of these, people and what they were really going through, the situation at hand. This really is a bottle episode, a way that we're able to get all of these characters together, and I think they did a really good job with it, and actually fixes one of my only flaws with the last episodes, as Anne Ranking had almost nothing to do in the last one. Here, she has a lot to do, and it's mainly because she is finding herself in the position that, Gwen was in at the time. She is now aiding Bob. They seem to have a very loving relationship. He's telling her that what he feels with her is real, but he said the same thing to Gwen, and no one is really buying it here. Nobody really believes that, this is the one. This is the person that he can maintain a healthy relationship with. And I really did love seeing that. The stuff between Gwen and Anne is extremely strong here, because you have someone like Anne who is so convinced that Bob does love her and is so convinced that they have this great relationship. But then Gwen comes in, and what initially seems like, Gwen is jealous, or she feels resentful. It's more of her warning her, cautioning Anne away, similar to how Joni did that to Gwen all those years ago. She is now doing that for Anne, and it actually might, unlike Gwen, it gets Anne to come to her senses. She kind of realizes that, yeah, I don't believe it when he says that he loves me. She doesn't believe it when he says that he cares about her and that she's the only person that matters to him. She doesn't believe that bullshit. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean anything to her. And I like that she tells him that. But similar to Gwen, she can't leave him. She needs to be with him. She needs to be there to support him. He needs someone that is going to help him out emotional wise, and Anne needs to be there for him in that way. And I love that conversation that her and Gwen do have, and I thought their scenes together were just so great, and I love what we got there. But also Gwen, realizing, that Bob does need to work. And the debacle that Anne and Gwen are having here is mainly that we realize that after Bob went into, rehab, he's now checked out after 6 days. He could have easily stayed, but he checked out after only, I think it was 6 weeks, basically. So Anne is feeling like, you need to rest. You cannot work anymore. You need to rest. But as we know, and Gwen knows, Bob needs to get the motor rolling. When he's not working, he feels like something's missing. He feels like he has no purpose unless he's working. So that's when Gwen, basically gives him this idea of doing Chicago. And it's both benefiting him because it gets him to work, but it really, you can tell this is something that she really wants to do. She wants to be relevant again. She wants to have another project, and she feels like the only way to do that is for them to work together again. And, Bob initially, he's not into this idea. He wants to do more serious work. He even talks to Patty, telling him, I don't want to do musicals anymore. I don't want that to be the only thing I'm associated with. He really wants to go on to more serious work, but everyone's telling him, no, you can't handle that. That's not something that you've tackled before. That's not something that people might be in favor of. And basically, he comes to the conclusion that he's going to work on both of them. And obviously, we know what this does to him health-wise, but seeing Bob come to that realization, it's kind of sad to see that, he could have easily rested, but he just didn't. He needed to keep working. Gwen knew that he needed to keep working. Patty knew he needed to keep working. And even though Anne wishes, I think all of them wish that he could just rest, they know that he just could not do that. They know that that's just not possible for Bob to do. And it's sad to see, for sure, but I thought they did a very good job with covering that. And even some of the littler moments in this episode, like that conversation that Anne has with Patty, who I have to say, I have not been a huge fan of Patty. Of course, I like Norbert Butz. He's fantastic in the role, but I haven't really cared for him that much up till this episode. But I really liked him here. You can see this as someone who he's trying to be there for Bob, but it's getting increasingly harder for him to do so. He's starting to lose hope. He knows that Bob is not going to get better. He knows that Bob just wants to continue working, and you can see how frustrated he's getting in that conversation, especially that he has with Anne, where he tells her, yeah, he checked out, and Anne seems a bit shocked, but you can tell Patty is not really. I think he knew that Bob, he just wasn't going to, he wanted to suffer. He didn't want to help himself, and it's sad to see, but he didn't want to help himself, and I thought they did a very good job with covering that. Even some of the other smaller moments, like what they do with Nicole, with her and her smoking, basically just to blend in with the adults because she feels so left out. It perfectly characterizes her. I mean, Gwen has a line where she talks about how the only person that Bob has not neglected is Nicole, and that's true. He hasn't neglected her because he wants to be there for her. He wants her to feel safe, and a way for her to feel safe, it seems, is to just not be in her life that much and to distance herself from her. We see that her and Anne have a great relationship. Her and Gwen do have this great relationship, but her and Anne especially, the relation that they have, because Anne is so close in age relation to her, here, I thought was great. But I did appreciate the humorous scene where, you know, Gwen is joking about how Anne is the same age as Nicole, and then Bob jokes about how Gwen's new love interest is the same interest as her. I thought that was really great. But again, seeing that relationship that those two have, no, romantic-wise, it's not good. It's not good at all. They're not working romantically, but they are still friends. Gwen just can't leave him because she knows what Bob needs. She's the only person that recommends that, no, he needs to keep working, and that's something that he needs to be able to do. She is convinced that he is going to work on Chicago. Even when he says it's not happening, she's convinced that he's going to say yes to Chicago, and I really do like that scene where they kind of reaffirm their sort of, you know, working relationship in that way, and I thought they did a very good job with that. The ending was definitely very devastating, like I said, when he says he's going to work on both of them, and they ask, you know, is this going to kill you? He says it won't, and then we realize they did have a heart attack. That's like my only small flaw of the episode. I don't really like these title cards. I think they're fairly on the nose and obnoxious, and I feel like if you nixed them from the episode, they wouldn't be nearly as ridiculous as they were. Even Neil Simon gets a lot to do here. There's a great moment where he's reflecting on something that Joan really loves, something that reminded him of her, and you can see he is still coping with her loss, and I like that moment where he, you know, he confides in Gwen and Patty and they're recalling memories. It's just, that stuff was really sweet. What I really loved about this episode in particular is that you don't view these people as just their performers, because obviously we saw that in other episodes, but this felt the most human. This felt like an episode where it's showing who Bob Fosse, Gwen Verdon, who they were outside of just their work. And sure, we have gotten to see that, you know, pop up in other episodes, but that really was front and center here. And I think that was definitely one of the things that made this episode probably the best we've had so far. Overall, I just adored this episode. I think this was absolutely the kind of episode that we did need. There's so much to love about this one. It had the littlest amount of musical numbers as well, but that's because it was trying to be a different type of episode. It was more of a one-act play, if you will, where everyone's confined in one room and everyone has to kind of deal with this one conflict. And I thought that conflict was so well explored throughout this entire episode. I love the moment where Patty is trying to get Gwen to sing something from Sweet Charity, and you can see that she's a little trepidatious. You could see that she isn't really into that because, again, she wants to be remembered for something else that isn't Sweet Charity. She wants to move on from it, but she does sing Where Am I Going? And it's a very powerful song. I think it kind of sums up the entire episode. Bob doesn't really know where he's going at this point. He just knows that he needs to keep working, and regardless if it affects him or not, mental-wise and also health-wise, he just needs to keep going. And that's the same with Gwen. She doesn't really know where she's going either, and I thought they summed all of that up very well. Just everything about this episode I absolutely adored, and I'm definitely going to give this episode as well an A. So overall, guys, that's it. I am now sort of caught up on Fosse Verdon. I still have 2 episodes to go, but I'm definitely going to get through them before the finale for sure. Again, I do apologize for not being able to review this show more analytically. I would have really liked to expand on things, particularly the last 2 episodes. I had so much that I really wanted to say, but you know, I only have so much time, unfortunately, in a catch-up review, so it is what it is. But either way, guys, that's it. Let me know what you guys saw of these 4 episodes overall. Love to hear your thoughts on it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.